Hello book lovers, welcome back to Procrastinate with Books. In today's episode, I'm going to share all the books that I've read in the month of April 2024, and I can't believe it. I'm sure you would find it very difficult to believe it as well that I've read not 5, not 10, not 15, not 20, but in fact 22 books this month. And I'm pretty elated by this overall accomplishment that I have achieved, and I'm feeling so happy that I got to read all these books. So if you are interested to check in what books I read, how did I feel about them, let's jump in further. Rather than starting off in a genre-wise area like we have been doing for months, I thought this time around I'll just share with how I felt about a group of books so as to give you a conclusive view around them. So I'll be starting first with the disappointing ones, then the ones that I felt okay, but it had some issues, then the really good ones, and at the last stage, the mind-blowing ones. So for the first one, I have The Last Bee Hunter over here, and this one in particular is a fantasy book, and I was pretty disappointed by this book primarily because there were just two things that went really well while reading this: the character build of X, who is the main protagonist in here, and the overall laying structure when it comes to the narrative style was really good, and that somehow compelled me to finish this book to the end. Otherwise, I simply think I should have DNF'd it at the very beginning, because as much as I went further into the story, I think there was a lot of plot holes. The story wasn't holding up. There were twists in left, right, and center directions, and nothing towards the end to actually conclude the story really well. And I felt that this was just a waste of time for me. Up next, we have Queen Macbeth. Now, this is the third book that I have read on this topic in general. So, a lot of Queen Macbeth, Lady Macbeth related stories are out there for you guys to try and read. But none of them so far have really convinced me that this is the best possible narrative out there. This one in particular sets a challenging tone for all the other versions out there, that Lady Macbeth, or what kind of person she is. Was she just a shadow of her husband, or what kind of strong protagonist character did she have, and all the lies that apparently have been fed to us by Shakespeare and that did not correlate to the actual history. Those kind of point of views were being introduced into the story, so I really had some high expectations. This, however, on the other end, did not really deliver to any such claims that the book was mentioning. Plus, the book was pretty short, so I don't think we had enough of the story or the content to really judge and relate to the story. So by far, this is pretty much an average read for me. I don't really think this is the best version out there for Lady Macbeth or Queen Macbeth in this case. I think someone really needs to research this a bit more further and come up with a better, fascinating version of this tale. Next on our list of books is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, and this is supposed to be a cozy fantasy book which is to be read in a cozy setting. So I was all set up for it, plus the length of the book is quite a bit of chunky piece, so we had a huge set of expectations related to the storylines. The story follows a fugitive who has fell in love with another person, and she has this magical abilities to brew the best magical teas, and they start their own cozy nook bookshop in a fugitive area where usually the pirates and those sorts of people usually visit, and they are living their happily sort of life until and unless the queen actually gazes her eyes upon them and discovers the fugitive who has fled the courts is actually over here. And then the whole plot twists occur, and there is about to be a battle. But towards the end, it's tackled in a very manipulative way. And I somehow feel that the overall story was working on still fine with low stakes and nothing much happening besides the cozy setting and how the people are suffering under the queen's reign. Those sorts of complexities are shown. Plus, the way the author actually handled the end, I think it was a bit rushed. There wasn't a lot of details around it. There is a second book coming through, so I'm still looking forward to read that. But as far as the end of this book concerns, I'm not really 100% sold on it. Next on our list is Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is the first book in this particular series, and I've already shared my thoughts at length about the whole series. But as for this particular part, I think I had several issues with it, starting off with the initial chapters and the way of descriptive styles in the wrong direction that were going in. I think that was something that did not work for me. However, the book too did end up managing to hook me up with the overall series, so I don't have any qualms about the reading perspective of the whole series. However, for this particular book, it was pretty much okay, slightly disappointed sort of a feeling. Next section, we'll be discussing about books that I found okay to read, but we did have some slight issues, and I'm going to discuss those issues specifically with you guys. On that note, the first book that we have is The Widening Stain. This one is a murder mystery that's been set up in a library. So, people who work in a library one day discover a body of one of their staffs lying around near the shelves, and they are now trying to piece up things together. And this is a detective mystery sort of a thing where the protagonist is also equally eager to solve the case and think about what's really happening, who's really the killer, sort of a thing. I think the overall murder mystery plot was really fine, apart from the thing that the initial plot build up was really slow and it took a lot of time to build up those things, whereas there were not even enough angles to cover, and the reason for it to be slow was something that did not make sense. Like, it was not fantasy or something that you have to cover up a lot of angles, you have to put in a lot of projections and make people understand different aspects. It was a library setting and a murder had happened. It's literally a two-liner thing. So explaining that to a very avid length was not something that worked out well for me. Next up, we have What Walks These Halls, and this is a paranormal investigative mystery where they're actually investigating a paranormal house or a haunted house, in other words. And while the investigators are looking at it from a third party's angle perspective, so that there are no connections attached, they are gradually figuring out that many people in their crew actually have some connections from past with the house, and that's how the overall mystery is being built up. Now, the thing is, while you're actually reading the story, you will be really immersed into it and you would enjoy everything. However, once the book ends, there is no lasting impression about it. And when it comes to, I think, haunted books or horror movies, the impressions are pretty significant. That's one of the very reasons why you actually invest your energy into them. And that was something that was really lacking. And despite that, I think it really went into a subtle mystery mode, and there were not a lot of high and low points where a spirit was really trying to hurt them at particular angles, and a lot of things that were not really explained in depth. I think this one could be slightly more elaborated, especially around the incidents and how things, tie up together towards the end. The next book that I read was The Symmetry of Untold Stories, and this one was one of the most novel books that I read this month. It was very different from an average read that we usually read. It has aspects of magical realism into it. Also, it is definitely not everyone's cup of tea, so I would like to make that very clear at the beginning of this book review. And apart from that, I think the overall relation and enigmas that the book actually built up were done really effectively. What did not work was the structure of the book. There were a lot of instances that suddenly popped out and were not later explained, and the story simply moved on to the next part or the next scene of the overall book. And I think that could have been managed a little better. There were a lot of different stories that were told within the story, just from the perspective of unfinished tales that the title tries to address to. And main protagonist was someone I really correlated with, and I actually enjoyed her character. The witty writing style in the book was also something that you have to look forward to. Her relatives are a different question altogether. I literally hated them from the very center of my heart, sort of a thing. I did not really correlate with any of the relatives in there, and especially the nature that they had. Oh my god, all of them were so greedy. Another book that captivated my heart from its cover was The House of Broken Bricks, and also the title was pretty intriguing. I had to try this, and so I did. But after reading it, I was pretty confused on which section to put this book in this video, because I wasn't heavily disappointed, but there wasn't even a lasting thing to really talk about in detail. So we'll make this really quick. The people or the members of the family who are actually living in this particular house, the house in question of the title, or actually have a pretty devastated lives themselves, and they are all dealing with difficult things in their own personal area. And somehow, when the society tries to throw lemons at them by acting really bad towards them, showing bad behavior, and not being the most ethical, kind people in the society, they really tolerate it all in silence, and somehow, though they do have different thoughts around it, they don't express them deliberately on the face of different people, which I think isn't the right approach. I mean, you can't go fighting off around with everybody, but at some point you need to make a stand. And I thought that was really an opportunity for this book to make a stand through those people, but it did not do so. I actually heard this as an audiobook, and I think the cast did the best they could with the script they were given. The overall storyline, despite it being so challenging and difficult on the livelihood of people, had little connection with me as a reader, and I could not really feel any of those challenges because those people were not really making any of the efforts to, overcome them. They were just living by through those days, and because of that, it felt really flat. Next up, we had the Devil's Flute murder, and this was a murder mystery based in Japan where the viscount of the house actually dies and the family is in mourning. And they decide to do a seance or conjure the spirit of the dead to actually talk to them and, express everything that they had in their heart and ask a few questions. But as they were doing it, one of other people in the house dies, and then they later realize that it's not a standard death, it's actually a murder, and that triggers off yet another investigation that actually loops in the investigation of the viscount who died as well. And dark serious histories and mysteries are coming into the light, and someone just doesn't want this to happen, and they are going on a brink of committing murders after murders into it. And that's where this whole enigma is being built up around the murder mystery angle, and accompanying that is a very mystical, magical realism angle of a devil's flute being played. This is a literal flute that's being played into the story, but it magically operates by itself, or it assumes that someone is actually playing, but no one is really touching that, nor has someone seen it being played in live and action, and that's where the another angle of mystery is being added into it. What I think is, if you're actually elongating the murder solving part, there really has to be a lot of elements and a lot of plot twists that needs to continuously, occur one after the other for you to confuse the reader or lead them to a certain path. That was not happening. There were rarely few clues coming up related to the murder mystery, and it was just being stretched at for a very long time, which I felt was unnecessary. You could have wrapped that up in a short, little, crisp story, and it would have done much better, I'm sure. The Janus Stone is also the last book that I read this month, and wrapping up this felt like I'm wrapping the month on a little wrong note because the other reads in this month were actually pretty good. So I'm a little disappointed with this one. The plot of this book is, however, very intriguing, very fascinating. It's a children's home that is being excavated now, and they are actually finding bones of children. And you might assume that since it's excavation, it was a children's home, it would be everything normal. But since the skull portion of the bones or the skeleton is actually missing in many of the skeletons that they find, they are assuming that this is not really the right thing that's happening here, and something goofy is cooking up in here, and it's a archaeological investigative murder mystery that's being solved in here. All the elements, all the goofy build-up of the dark Romanian ages and sacrifices and those sort of angles are addressed really beautifully. Even the references to those periods are pretty accurate. I did check them up by googling it up, and I think everything else was really good. Only one thing that really ticked me off in here was the angle or the personal relationship of Dr. Ruth, who's actually an investigating officer on the case from archaeological side and also the police side angle, and those two are sort of having an affair, and they are about to have a baby, and he's already married and he's cheating with his wife, and a lot of other things that are happening in the background of the story that are not consecutively a part of the main story but are used as a framework to drive the whole story together for them to be involved together in this murder mystery. And I think it's really taking me off because of moral differences that we have in opinion. Especially there are so many particular parts that I could reference. I may spoil the book, but I don't care because this is really something that needs to be talked about openly. I think there's a particular part where he's feeling really guilty that he has cheated upon his wife, and now he's going to suffer with her by taking her to a play, so it should be all right now. I mean, how are you comparing cheating to your wife with taking her out on a stupid play? And you think those stupid actions just by accompanying her to stuff, buy stuff and taking her to places will make up for that, and he's not even telling her the truth. It really pissed me off somehow. First up, we have The Divorcees, which is a very powerful started book, and it starts with a punch on the face, immersing you into the world of divorcees. And this is the early 1900s timeline, I think, where people look at divorces at a very shameful eye, but those with means and power, by power I mean money at hand, can always find things to dispose of, even if it means their daughters. So all the divorced people, especially the women of those ages, are being sent to this sort of a hostel staycation kind of a place where they wait out for 6 weeks for the official period to actually file for a divorce to their husbands. That actually elongates a proper proof of stay where they have been living in a separated places, and as soon as those 6 weeks are over, they can simply get the divorce and be done with it and carry on with their lives. And during these times, most of them are chilling, except a few who really don't want to, move on to the next husband and go on with their life in the same way that they had before. They are really looking out for freedom, power, even though money is not the liberty that they really have at hand. And it was a very beautiful, different kind of a tale that immerses you into a different timeline and showcases the struggles of those people, which was really fascinating to read. Now, I read two books by Harini Nagendra which were kindly sent to me. The first book was The Bangalore Detectives Club, and the other was Murder Under the Red Moon. Both follow the same protagonist. They are part of the series but also can be read as a standalone novel. The first book actually follows Kaveri, who's also the protagonist in second book, and she's just married, and it's the 1920s timeline in this book as well, and they are following a murder mystery investigation sort of a plot line. Now she is just relocated to Bangalore from her native lands, and being the daughter of a professor, she was eagerly waiting to complete her studies. But because of the timelines, she's not really confident to share those feelings about pursuing higher studies and being a detective and going on that path with her husband, because those timelines were pretty strict and women did not have the same liberty. Also, this book is based on in Bangalore in specific, so there are a lot of lingos that are discussed in the book, which are also mentioned towards the end of the book as Kaveri's dictionary, which really add a unique aspect to the book. Plus, the book also mentions some sort of South Indian curries and other recipes towards the end of the book that she ends up making in her own version, which is a nice little touch to add. I think I really enjoy if book does discusses some aspects of cooking into it. I think mentioning the recipes towards the end just marks off a beautiful tick for it. Now, I think I absolutely forgot to tell you the plot of these two books. In the first book, she has just relocated to Bangalore, and as she is just settling into the new society, a recent murder occurs at a place she just went for a gala dinner with her husband along with the Britishers, and that follows the whole trail line. In the second book, however, she is now working as a detective person, and she has her own club opened up where she's trying to solve different detective mysteries and helping out people in the surrounding. Her mother-in-law is not the biggest fan of this as shown in the book too, but without spoiling it much for you, there is another case that has come up and she just won't be at rest until she really finds the victim and the murderer this time as well. The fourth book in this Panchakanya series by Kuruldas Gupta, this actually follows one of the side characters of Ramayana. So I would recommend people to have a little basic knowledge of Ramayana before picking this one up, because that is like a baseline that's required, though it approaches Mandodari's story from a very different and unique angle. One, you need to have the basics covered up, and two, you need to approach this book from an open mindset, because it's not exactly the same as what happens in Ramayana, because then it would simply be duplicating the actual story. It is investigating things from a different angle, and it is a very character driven book, and it shows the complexities of the duties that Mandodari had to perform and the kind of decisions that she had to make, contemplating between what she really wants to do and what she feels is actually right, and toggling through that dilemma is really portrayed well into the story. And it was a definitely great and different kind of a read amongst the book that I was actually reading this month. Then we have The Curse for True Love, which is the third book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. Again, detailed review is already out there for you to watch. Long story short, I did enjoy this one, especially because of the way things ended. I think the climax of the book was really something that I enjoyed a lot. As soon as you thought that, okay, things are moving in the right direction, something else would happen. and your heart would just skip a beat at that particular moment, and it was really built up really well. And I think the author did a commendable job of at least the anticlimactic situations that were there that the reader comes across. It really was beautifully delivered. I'm still at a loss for the words of the series. Next, I read Other People's Words, which is a non-fiction book that I picked up for this month, and it's also a memoir. I think I really find reading memoirs the easiest amongst non-fiction because there is a level of comfort that I'm sort of building up this year into it, and it was interesting. This one particularly addressed on the concept of how even when people die and leave you, you are still left with fragments of their memories and words within you, the way they used to speak to you, and that somehow, gets rooted within you. And then when you talk about those people, especially, the words are delivered in a similar format, and through you and through those words and through those memories, they are still with you, existing in the very space that you are there. It was a non-fiction, but it felt so much like a literary fiction to me because the writing style was amazing. There is something that I also wanted to read out to you guys, so we'll just quickly check through for that. The thing about a story is that you dream it as you tell it, hoping that others may then dream along with you. And in this way, memory and imagination and language combine to make spirits in the head. That's often what it feels like. The Hungry Dark is a paranormal murder mystery slash thriller sort of a book, and this one in particular is about a young girl who, from a very young age, could see things across things that nobody else would be able to see. But instead of, calming her daughter or making sense of trying to investigate what she's really seeing and what kind of problematic affairs is she having, rather than that, her father actually started leveraging that to build up hysteria amongst people and actually conducting shows by conjuring spirits and seances and creating this whole audience and shows and whatnot, which was a really tactful way of dealing with the situations and trying to make money out of someone's trouble. So the author did try to build up that character in such a way that you actually hate him, and you do hate him. So a job well done in that direction. But despite that, I think there's a whole different setting of a arena where the whole childhood memories are being conjured and connected together in some sort as you grow up, and those two links later align, and from there the mystery starts to unfold. There is definitely a high thriller vibe in this one because the spooky elements of those dark places in a snowy setting is something that one would really enjoy, and it does spook you a little bit of sort. And if you're looking for a spooky read at this time of the year that's set up in a snow setting and related to some sort of paranormal activities, if you opt for it, you can definitely try it. Moving on to oh my god, wow section of books, the first book that I have for you is The Ingenus Mechanic. Now, this is a dystopian world built up or in a post-apocalyptic setting where the world has almost been deserted except the meticities that have been constructed really beautifully and in a very technologically advanced sort of a format by the people in power, and now they are running these meticities and people are working under them, sort of a thing. There are a very few amount of people who are living in the outskirts of the city and somehow driving their own living. Now, one of these people who is living in the outskirts is our main protagonist, and based on his skills and capabilities, he somehow lands upon a job in the Meticity. And once he starts working there and once he starts intermingling with the crowd over there, he's trying to understand the complexities of things that are driving the Metal City's technological advancement and what are the kind of algorithms that are built up. The book actually felt like a really good cross between Hunger Games and some really technologically fast-paced book. There's also an angle of power-hungry government who's trying to keep other people at the very base level so that no one is able to climb up to the ladder and compete with them and ask them any sort of questions, and they are really making sure of it. And the protagonist exploring those angles and trying to fight them off is a really interesting thing to put in a post-apocalyptic setting, and I'm really excited to read what happens next because this is a complete series, and though the book had some sort of a closure, the story has not completely ended it. Next up, we have The Nightingale's Castle. The great thing about this book is that it's a work of fiction, but it's inspired from a true story of the Blood Countess and the true events that have happened in history, the author has also made sure that she leveraged out the true confessions of people who were actually tortured at that time and the real confessions that they made. She have introduced those actual statements into the story, which made it even more authentic for me to read. The courtly settings and all the background setup is slightly modified for fictional reasons, but you can look through those curtains in a sheer format sort of a way if you do your research enough, I think. Story follows a young girl who was born as an illegitimate child, and there she was handed over to a peasant's family nearby for her to be brought up as a young girl. And as she grows up, she somehow finds her way through the castles and ends up being a serving girl in the castle, where the queen's eye lands up on her, and there is some immediate chemistry between building up between them, and she asks her to be one of her maidens to look after her, and from there the whole story starts. And it also introduces you to the complexities of courts at that time and how men have always been slightly offended and slightly agitated if a woman is in charge, especially in the rule of those time where there were always kings. There is a queen in here who's safeguarding her kingdom, and the men around her are not really comfortable with that idea. And it really brings around so many trajectories that are being discussed and the treasons that could be committed against her, and how she tries to keep herself safeguarded amongst all those. But the end is not really beautiful. It's sad, it's tragic, but it is delivered in the most beautiful way. Then we had the Ballad of Never After, and this is the second book of Broken Heart series, and it had to be here because it was one of the great reads that I had. The book also got me invested into this whole series with its amazing plot twists, great character build-ups, a lot of timing impacts that were happening in the book, and a lot of fast-paced movement and closures that were happening actually made me really interested in the book. The detailed review is out for you to check. Another great book that I read was Lahore by Manjeet Sodhi, and this is another book that's also based on the real-time events, especially during the timelines when India was actually trying to gain its independence and the whole handover from Britishers to Indian government was happening at that point of time. There were also certain partitions that occurred between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many other regions of the native Hindustan that the Britishers had conquered because of various reasons that are present in history and we all know. And this book actually explores through those partition related stories. This book is part of the Partition trilogy, which is a 3-book series. This is the first book in that, which constitutes of the stories related to Lahore and Delhi majorly. The book's title is Lahore. The focus is around the partition of Punjab, the United Punjab that was divided between Lahore and Amritsar to the Indian territory, and the whole stories related to it. Honestly speaking, there is nothing happy about the story. Specifically, if I talk about, it's not really a happy tale, but how could it be? There has been so much that has happened around that time that there wouldn't be any happy endings. So if you're looking for a happy ending, don't read this book. It makes you dewy-eyed even talking about those atrocities that humans committed. I think there's something deeply wrong with those humans who actually made it and tried to justify it on the basis of regional or religious discriminations. I think it's just outright foolish to act the way that people acted in those durations. And I wasn't the most happy person when I read it, and for days I couldn't do much besides being sad about things that have already happened and things that I couldn't change about. And at the end, I just read another story, but the impact that this book had has made sure that I wouldn't be picking the next book very soon until and unless I'm in the strong mindset of coming across similar sorts of stories that ends in a sad, tragic way. Last and final book that I read this month, the fourth, was a great dark academia setting murder mystery. And more than a murder mystery, it was a survival tale of those 4 people who are being in question at the title. This is the story of those 4 people who have joined this elite academy on the basis of scholarships, and though they don't necessarily fit in with the elite crowd that's been here forever, they are trying to have their own living by sticking together and, just moving day by day, but things start to escalate in the wrong direction and nothing is ever beautiful anymore. The story is really great and gruesome all at the same time. And if you really have to know the people, the way they survive, their zest for living through and going through everything all together, standing and sticking through with each other, is what will really keep you going. And you just want to see them end happily, but after going through so much, a happy ending is not really a plausible solution. Often in reality of life as well, I think it's impossible to come out of so many situations unscarred. And these, my friends, have been all the books that I have read in the month of April. I know they are quite a bunch, and it has been a big fleet of accomplishment personally for me. Unlike the usual self of telling which books you would like to read, I have a particular question in mind for you guys. Am I the only one torturing my soul by reading tragic books, or you are also one of them? If so, what kind of tragic books are your comfy reads? Do let me know that in the comments down below. And I'll catch up with you in my next video. Until then, keep your coffee strong and your TBRs long. Goodbye.